how there was a transformation, a rupture in our understanding of the land and the water and the place that we live in, and ushered in a new world of a modernist. I mean, David is saying that they wanted to make the present modern. In a sort of an intellectual sense, I'm afraid that they succeeded beyond belief. They succeeded beyond their wildest imaginations. Because today, if you think about how Pakistanis think about their system, it is a deeply modernist understanding of the system, with all of this. And that has a price. And the society needs to have an open and free debate. I'm not saying I'm in favor of this thing or that thing, or it should be like that, or it should be like that. I mean, that's for people who know a lot more than I do. I'm just simply saying that a free and open debate about, well, these are the prices, these are the consequences, and these are the sorts of benefits, and who is going to benefit and who's going to lose as a consequence of that is at premium. So, I suppose the message really is, with regard to droughts and floods, again, the differential geography of who's vulnerable, who gets hurt, who benefits. I give you a simple example. In the 2010 flood, the media discovered for the first time that actually the operation of the breaching section is a political thing. They dramatized it. For those of us who worked in this and have actually looked at the historical documents, for 150 years it has been a political decision. 150 years it has been a political decision. The media figured it out in 2010. And to be honest with you, from my perspective, it should be a political decision. Because you're operating within an animal. The irrigation department has not lost an infrastructure in 150 years. You've got to know that. Because irrigation department's protocols say that you will not lose an infrastructure. And they have succeeded in that. If you talk to an irrigation engineer and say, how are you doing? You read the Canal and Drainage Act. I can claim today that the Pakistan, Punjab irrigation and the Sindh irrigation departments or the frontier irrigation departments are the three most efficient organizations in the world. How is that possible? Well, read the Canal and Drainage Act. What does the Canal and Drainage Act 1873 mandates them to do? And I can promise you that today the three irrigation departments fulfill their mandate to a T. And not one aspect of that mandate is ever violated. The only issue is the societal expectations have changed. The societal expectation has become that everybody should get water. Whoever thought of that? Equitable distribution of water, that is the consequence of a democratic post-colonial society. Canal and Drainage Act was simply saying that water at 64% cropping intensity, pani jana chahiye. Today the cropping intensity is 150%, pani kahan se aaya? It was never about that. So, that historical research tells you you can do all you want. As long as your enabling legislation is the same as Canal and Drainage Act 1873, I promise you they're doing a great job. Change the legislation, change the parameters within which they work, you might have a better chance of getting it done.
Alright, so after listening to the panel, I am now beginning to wonder, is every sort of technological transition that you can imagine, is all of that going to be just Faustian bargain, as we've just said? That, we will come back to this, that what are now the implications of thinking about new things? Let me just open up to bring in the participants. Let's take a couple of rounds of questions and then let's go back to the panel and ask about the future. I mean, what does it mean now that we have looked at this particular period and the particular implications for geography, from the point of view of architecture, from the point of view of economy, from the point of view of history? Well, what's out there for us? And again, to this discomfort of when we talk about new technologies or thinking about new ways of managing the basin, and maybe now even this phase of managing the basin may be problematic. What are good ways to think about? So, सबको रिजेक्ट कर रही है, मोहम्मद रसूलुल्लाह के बारे में क्या है?
ये आपकी जाती है. I think I'm being misunderstood. What I am saying is, every intervention, whether technological or otherwise, has benefits and costs. They accrue to some and not to others, and so on.
Hello.
Anything. You can talk about pharmaceuticals, you can talk about transportation, you can talk about motor vehicles, you can talk about metro bus, you can talk about motorways, anything you get to. All I'm saying is, for heaven's sakes, I have come down from the Sinai, and here I am, I'm going to solve all of your problems. What I'm saying is a fair and honest decision. It's a societal decision. And who am I to stand there and say productivity who am I to say that I am simply saying, let's have an open conversation about it, and when the society decides we want to go in that direction. Nothing that you and I say is going to stop that. So all I'm saying is that engineer साहिबान से मेरी simply ये गुजारिश है कि जनाब ये मत कहिए कि बस जी अब आप फिक्र मत कीजिए भाई आ गए हैं। आप उनको ये कहिए कि जनाब ठीक है हम ये आ गए ये हमारे पास एक solution है उसका here's a solution that we have. Someone can say कि जनाब इसके अंदर ये भी मसला हो सकता है कोई बोले कहानी इसका ये भी फायदा हो सकता है फिर मुआशरे का काम है फैसला करना कि अच्छा जनाब ये जो अब आप गाड़ियाँ चला रहे हैं मुआशरे की फैसला सड़कें बना रही है उसके ऊपर गाड़ियाँ चलेंगी एक फायदा ये कि कितनी सहूलत है गाड़ी में बैठ के जाएंगे दूसरा ये कि धुआं भी होगा पोल्यूशन भी होगी ट्रैफिक भी होगी अब अपने के बीच में मसला कोई नहीं बस आप गाड़ी में बैठ कर जाएं तो वो बढ़िया है very fair comment very fair that's all I'm saying.
Okay, so let's take a few questions from the audience and then of course we'll go back to that. Let's give chance to people who have not been able to talk about this. So, we have mics. Okay, so Giri Bilkul.
Thank you for this opportunity, sir. We seem to be ignoring the elephant in the room. We have to look at the immediate future, the long-term future. We have lost 3 rivers of Punjab to a very aggressive upper riparian. We have, in the bargain, we have got 4 gutters, by the way, 4 drains from India, the Budiara, the Fazilka, the Salim Shah, the Kasoor Nala. What a tragedy. They take away 3 sweet water resource, major, about 26% of our water, perennial, and they give us 4 gutters, and we accept it. That is the dilemma of Pakistan today. And they take Kashmir, 3 western rivers, the major Indus main, the 2 major tributaries, Jhelum and Chenab, in military occupation. And now I have been to India. One of my teachers is sitting right there, Dr. Khalid Duras. I've been to India twice. I was also in Bangalore when he was not there. And we've asked the Indians, how much more mischief are you going to make? Because we are running out of water. We are not able to sustain and not able to efficiently anymore run our irrigation system, not just because we are 3 times more than we were in partition or 4 times more. The fact is that you are doing something that is not allowed under the Indus Water Treaty. And they have said, oh, you should now worry about your groundwater. I said, well, we have heavily, mined it, we have contaminated it, also because of our own mistakes. But now they're looking at our groundwater. They said it's the Indus River Treaty. I said, no, it's the Indus Water Treaty. So we have a very aggressive upper riparian. You cannot ignore it. And Indus Basin, by the way, is the 3rd largest basin in India. It's for the 5 different classifications they have. The Indus Basin command area is from 140,000 square kilometers to 450,000 square kilometers. So we are sharing a basin, and the upper riparian is out to get us, because there's no other explanation. He and what Modi just recently said should wake us all up. We have to look at the future. We have to look at the environmental degradation of Pakistan society. We have to look at the absolute disaster when it comes to the northern area political linkage. The Indians have maneuvered the last 15 years to call the northern areas of Pakistan as part of Greater Kashmir. So we cannot get any funding, any multilateral funding in Kashmir. And, in northern areas, beg your pardon. So where are we heading? Why are we ignoring this? Why are we ignoring this very serious issue of the immediate future? Please talk about it. What can we do about it?
Okay, thank you, sir. So we more questions? Let's gather a couple of more questions and then we'll go back to the panel.
This is for Dr. James Westport. He has carried out a climate change studies on Indus in 1991, and it is a burning challenge. I would like to ask him that how he sees now. It is 25 years now, and new emerging challenges are still there, climate change. What is going to happen to Indus Basin with this climate change?
One more question, and if it is about the future of the Indus, then we can sort of ask these questions to the panel.
Thank you. My question is for Dr. David Martin. From your book, I was just fascinated by this contrast and the inspiration that the British got from Savarna, the governor of Multan, at the time, the Ranjit Singh's time, and how they saw themselves as fulfilling his mission. And this is going back to the idea of actually technological development pre-British period. And I was fascinated by the fact that what the British criticized about Savarna was that he was in a way too modern. The fact that he only was allocating water and allowing people to build canals, whoever could produce the most. Whereas the British were concerned about preserving, blood relations. So how does this figure into the idea of, did we miss the bourgeois revolution because we got rid of the local power structures and the British came in? Just wanted your thoughts about that.
Great. So let's take one more question then, because now we have two sort of teams running in parallel. Any more questions that somebody wants to ask?
My name is Abdul Khalid Khan from Malta. The question is to Dr. Mustafa. Simple question. Indus Delta is dying. And we read that Nile Delta is thriving. There is prosperity over there. There are very few complaints. The inhabitants of Indus Delta are full of grievances and complaints, as they say, that their fish is reducing and the people are not getting enough water. And this is true. Now, this has a relation to what I am going to ask. The Indus Delta was getting 90 plus billion acre feet of water before the construction of Sakar Barrage. And when Sakar Barrage was built, some water was used. And then in sequence, while other barrages were built, gradually the water was used for industry. And very late in the history, Mangala Dam and Kabira Dam were constructed. And of course, again, the Indus Delta was denied somewhat. These dams, as we all know, they do not consume water. They are only facilitated. They store water and then regulate it and release it every year. They do not consume. So what happens is, who consumes? Because after all, Indus Delta gets lesser water with every project. So what happens is, it is irrigation. It is the canals. When you provide the facility of storage, you increase the consumption of water on the canals. The water is consumed in larger quantities, and the Indus Delta gets reduced quantities.
Okay.
Now there is a conflict. Not okay. There is a conflict between the benefit. With water flowing into delta, there is a benefit in the delta. And with reduced water and letting it flow into your irrigated lands, there is a benefit to the lands. The conflict, and I want to have your views on this conflict. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, what I sense is that the audience is now eager about the future. And you can take individual questions if you want, but what I would like is that let's just go one by one and reflect on what the future of Indus, taking lessons from history, how do you see what's ahead? And you can actually pick on particular questions and answer them as well. So maybe starting from Khalil sir on that end.
I would actually defer this to other panelists because I think it's not really very much
Okay. Professor Gilmore, there was a particular comment about your book as well, if you want to address, or you can reflect on the future if you want.
Yeah, well, let me just say a quick word in response to the question, because it does raise a huge but impossible question, but it's one that sort of bears on the future as well, which is, you know, one can do these sorts of counterfactual thought experiments. You know, what if the British had not built this kind of system? Then what? And so, of course, one speculation on this is you can look at, well, what was there before and what might have evolved. And I think that's, in a sense, I mean, there's no answer one can ever come to a question like that, but it's worth thinking about in the sense that the British, of course, were masters at self-celebration. So they very much created a narrative of the great success of the canal colonies. In fact, many of the problems that Pakistan has dealt with more recently were evident early on in problems of waterlogging and salinity. And these problems were well known even in the late 19th century. And the British debated them but had no answer to them. And so there's a real question, and the question about Sawan Mall is interesting because what it indicates was, of course, there were people who were committed to the development of irrigation before the British showed up, and there were people who were building canals nowhere near on the scale. I mean, one thing that I would point to, and again, it has some relevance for the future. I think predicting the future is impossible. So, I mean, one can make comments, but I don't think there's any way to know what will happen in the future. But on the other hand, I would just say quickly, and it's relevant to this, that people have commented, and I think it's absolutely correct, that the one critical thing for the future is really a political problem, and it relates, among other things, to land distribution. And this is a critical issue in terms of not just the realities of how water is distributed, but the politics that shapes how water is distributed. But I would say one thing you can track through the development of the canal colonies is that as this developed under the British, it was not simply that an unequal distribution of land developed, because in some places, as in the Chenab colony, there was nowhere near the same problem of unequal land as developed in some of the later colonies. But there was an ideological linking of landlordism to the Baradari system in Punjab. And this has had immense impact because it's created a structure of legitimacy for the landlord system, that it's tied to a kind of social order which is embedded in the legal structure, which is embedded in a whole range of popular attitudes, and most particularly in politics. So I would just say that one, this is back to the path dependency issue. There are a whole range of issues you have to track out historically in order to then think about what's happening now.
Jim, would you like to take a...
Okay, thanks. Well, from a Department of Architecture, all we think about is the future and how it might be designed, regardless of all of the things that constrain us, all of the problems that we face. The inspiration for our field and the aspiration of our field is to say, well, in what ways? In what ways can the future be envisioned that address the problems that we have faced and continue to face? So, with that in mind, I'd like to use the example of climate change that Dr. Hashmi has raised, because here's a case in which Pakistan and the Indus Basin have stood out as having some of the strongest resources available anywhere in the world for addressing this problem. When we were doing the work together, the Indus Basin model was the best model anywhere in the world to study the potential effects of climate change in a large, complex river basin. And it pointed out the limitations of that model for doing that, as well as some of the ways of imagining possible futures. There was the upstream-downstream question. Under some scenarios, the upstream had adverse impacts, when one might think it would be downstream. In other cases, differently. One of the reasons that this type of work was kind of pioneering here in Pakistan and the Indus is precisely because of the type of work that Daniel Hashmi and his team on snow and ice hydrology were doing, was really just kind of taking us beyond a previous generation of University of British Columbia types of studies, and the role of science and the kind of imagination of possible futures had a strength there, a particular strength in that snow and ice hydrology team. It's crucial to see that carried forward along with other approaches. One of the things we were committed to is saying not just that models will give us answers, but that every discipline is needed: archaeology, history, economics, sociology, and not just that that they call it the expertise of these fields was insufficient, that the consultation of people and addressing not the future problems as framed by a model, but the contemporary problems brought to the table by people who are really demanding the solutions. This is what we call the critical water problems approach. That climate change types of analyses need to speak not solely to questions of climate change, but to the critical water problems today. I don't know if you remember when one of your engineers came in and said, why should we think about climate change? We cannot get a rain gauge installed in Balochistan. and we said, well, what's the rain gauge for? And he said, well, there's a dam project that we're working on. And so the dam project considered some of the potential climate variability and extremes. Well, and no. And so then once that contemporary significance, immediate significance of the life of a dam, being 30, 50, 70 years, then it became clear as to how one would want to consider long-term futures as part of contemporary engineering design questions. So all of this to say that then to the question of the Indus Waters Treaty, we said, well, here's a case where if you think about the impact of the Indus Waters Treaty on the eastern rivers, you have a planned and a known depletion of river inflows. What has been done, what needs to be done? And society was able to address part of that challenge by saying, well, there's going to be a need for storage and link canals from the western to eastern rivers to keep canals going. Now, the problem of drains and of urban and industrial contamination of rising groundwater is hugely pressing at the moment, as are the challenges to the Indus Waters Treaty that are used every day now. So these are the sorts of aspects of kind of contemporary problems that one hopes and prays that the Indus and Pakistan's way of grappling with these challenges in the past has inspired society in so many different ways, that this will continue in the future, and that the way in which the Indus Basin management has been one of the world's greatest laboratories for progressive and imaginative water management to address society's problems. That's going to continue into the future. And it will do so in ways that we can't yet imagine. But I think we can look forward to as the teams of young students and faculty and institutions of the sort that LUMS and UET, Punjab and NUST and Mehran and so many others in Peshawar are tackling. That's what I think the future will depend upon. Thanks very much.
Great. Khalid sir?
This is a difficult one. Being an engineer, of course, I would immediately the kind of solutions and the way forward that strikes you as black and white. Build more dams, build more canals. We've depended on these supply side solutions for a long time. And my view is that for the future, given the existing irrigation architecture that we already have got and the way we have developed it, there's no shortcut to say that we're going to transform things in a big way. What you really have to do is what is doable and what can be done. There are 2 or 3 given things that we must keep in mind. One, the variability of flows in our river systems. We must keep in mind that more than 80% of our flows in the summer particularly, when most of our water comes, they come in summer. In the rest of the year, we have a trickle. It's only this regulation that has made it possible to sustain perennial irrigation. We seem to forget this. Without this regulated flow, you could not have a sustainable irrigated agriculture in this country.
So storage is the key.
Absolutely. Number 2, the map that, the figure that Danish showed us this morning, he said these lines now give us a given. Remove these lines today, what is left? Desert. Keep that in mind, and we seem to forget that. And my third thing is that neither the lines nor the regulation have brought us harm. It is our own doings and the way we managed it that has brought us this harm. The future forward, the way forward is that we have to amend our ways. First and foremost, we must realize that whether it's to preserve the delta or to sustain irrigation in a healthy manner, you have to use good science to be able to find a good answer. Just hypothetical assumptions and conjectures will not get us anywhere. I think the challenge that we are facing today in our water sector is that we are still frivolous with our water use. And if we have a treacherous upper aquarium, then we have to build stronger resilience in the system. And that stronger resilience will only come if we can bring good science to work and good management to work. And that is not happening, unfortunately, although Dr. Westcott has pointed out that we've got these grand institutions, but we need to inspire these institutions to be really addressing these real issues, to find answers. Today, for example, the greatest challenge is if you're going to save water, it requires a cost-effective way to bring about that cost efficiency of water use in agriculture. Can you sustain in this time that 95% of our renewable fresh water is used in agriculture? When Israel has 1/100th the amount of water, and the value of agricultural production is more than ours. That tells you the enormous potential that exists.
And I'm sure that the shock absorbers that you're talking about is not just infrastructure.
It's not infrastructure, it's the way you approach it. In other words, it's doable, and there's a tremendous potential. But I think on the more important issue about the future is climate change vulnerabilities are going to make these problems far more complex. Our internal dissension and contentions and contentious issues that we've raised in sharing water among ourselves, and then the uncertainties because of IWT now, they add yet another layer of complexity. All of this tells us we have to be prudent users of water, number one. Number two, we have to get all of these various disciplines to work in an interdisciplinary manner. It's not only an area only supply side solutions. They will not work anymore. There's very little scope left for that. And my third suggestion is, let us not think that all of this comes without cost. Your national policy making must recognize this. And if we don't take care, then we seriously jeopardize our future.
Great. So, in some sense, when I looked at, for example, this report that was compiled by the SR panel, on which both Danish and Khalid Saab was there, I'm actually not too pessimistic, because when targets were set there, it was being agreed upon by a very esteemed panel with his opinion across the spectrum. So it doesn't seem like an impossible task in that perspective. That it may seem to the audience that the engineer's way of looking at things, as Danish described as a plumbing network, is very different from social scientist perspective. But really, now we are beginning to talk to each other, and increasingly there is this realization that those sort of things are there. So if Nani would allow Danish Saab to speak first, and then maybe you can do the concluding remarks for the panel.
Khalid Saab शफकत फरमाते हैं लेकिन डांटते भी बहुत हैं. But on balance, हमेशा शफकत इनकी ज़्यादा रहती है मेरे से बनिस्बत डांट. But anyway, I get yelled at, but I also get a lot of affection from Khalid Saab. So I'm grateful for that. I think.
Well, we have a number of questions.
Yes. Okay. I think I need to answer that question real quick. But I think the question is very much tied in with what Khalid Saab said, what's been said before, and about the future. I think, Gigi, I can get into a conversation whether irrigation consumes water or storage, what kind it is. I mean, let's just talk about storage for a simple thing. If you were to come at storage from a scientific perspective, there are three kinds of storage that I know of. There's a fourth kind I'm always. One is groundwater, one is surface water, and one is in dry soil. Those are the three kinds of storage. So when one is talking about storage, only a fool would disagree that you should not store water. I am just simply saying, let's have an open debate, a conversation. Which storage is more suitable in our context? We do groundwater injection in United States, in many parts of the world. I think even in Israel, they make a lot of use of groundwater storage in order to take care of this. And I'm not against surface storage. If it works, technically, scientifically, by all means, who could argue with that? My bigger question, which I'd like to highlight over here, is the issue of science. And what I find deeply pessimistic is that in this country, engineering is a profession, But then it's pure science. When one is talking about paraglacial geomorphology, one is talking about process geomorphology, one is talking about hydrology, one is talking about modeling and any number of those things. Engineering is one, but there are many others. I often get very angry at people and I say, yeah, name me a process geomorphologist in the water sector of Pakistan. You have a water sector with the highest silt loads in the world, literally an entire landscape sculpted by water, and I will stick my neck out and I'll say there's not one process geomorphologist in this country who will tell you. I supervised a dissertation. This gentleman was doing a PhD on dams. He was doing like 700 dams in the world and what was going on with that. And I said, young man, I am not going to look at your analysis unless you talk to me about silt. I'm not having a conversation. You look at the data on silt and bring that in there and we can have a conversation about what your dissertation has to say about these numbers. I say in a country of 180 million today, we have 80 weather stations. We have 270 in Nepal alone. And I think just in the greater Denver area, there are probably more than 500 weather stations. Right? What I'm saying is, I said absolutely agree with you. Scientific research, basic pure scientific, I ask, you have your Department of Water Informatics. How many pure scientists are there doing pure research? In the United States, United Kingdom, the rest of the world, a lot of the engineering sort of, forgive me for using the word hubris, has been tempered a lot of times by interaction with the science and learning. You go in that particular direction, yes, these are the sorts of benefits, but then there are also set of costs that you have, and then eventually it's a society decision whether you want to go in that direction. So to say that delta ke saath kya hoga, who's doing it, who's not doing it. Sir, I'm not competent to answer that question. I haven't looked at the data. I don't know if the data is there. I have seen the data production in this country. People say, name me how many meter readers, gauge readers of the irrigation department actually go to their work. I have seen literally during flood period, Axians who are making up numbers. I know for a fact that 90% of the data, hydrological data in this country at the gauge station is actually made up. And then you want me to have a conversation and argument, thinking I am right and you're wrong and this and that and this and that. That's it. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to engage in that. Baki, when one is talking about upper riparian, lower riparian, I got to say to you that आज तक किसी lower riparian या upper riparian के मुताबिक कलमा है नहीं. जो बातें आप इंडिया के मुताबिक करते हैं बिल्कुल हूबहू वही बातें सिंध में पंजाब के मुताबिक होती हैं, अपना डिस्ट्रिक्ट मुल्तान में डिस्ट्रिक्ट लाहौर के मुताबिक होती हैं. तो ये तो दिस इज अ ह्यूमन कंडीशन कि आज तक देयर हैज नेवर बीन अ केस व्हेन अपर राइपेरियन हैज सेड लोअर राइपेरियन सेड व्हाट अ ब्यूटीफुल अपर राइपेरियन. आई लव दैट. I wish I could hang out with them. Look at the canal commands, look at the water course level. It's the same story. Let's just leave that aside whether it is aggressive. There's no such thing as a nice upper. So I guess for the future, I'm pessimistic a little. I'm pessimistic for a number of reasons. Forget about natural, social sciences. Even as a social scientist, I am terrified that there is no generation of pure scientific research emerging in Pakistan at the moment. Somebody parachutes in from Germany and does some work on the glaciers. Somebody parachutes in from somewhere and maybe does some hydrological work. I don't know if anyone does. But in terms of indigenous capacity, Wata used to have something, let's say, trained back in the 50s and the 60s. But even those are gone. So, future who's left? What is left is engineers on the one hand, and काफी NGO वाला and the social scientists जो ये सारे शायरी करते रहते हैं, they are on the other side. और उसके अंदर इस कदर फजूल बहस हो गई, इस कदर फजूल बहस हो गई है कि इस बहस में शामिल होना मेरी राय है, फिर अपनी नाक कटवाने का.
Imran, so on that very pessimistic note,
it's a provocation. Get the natural science research going in this country. Develop the infrastructure. Without that,
Danish, I would completely agree. We have
sir, आपने rain gauge. What is a rain gauge? It's a bloody bucket. उसके अंदर फुटा डाल के आप नापे कितना है? वो नहीं हो रहा.
It's impossible
either. But just a few points picking up from the discussion, I think. And one is that I think what's coming through is that water is power. If water is scarce, any scarce resource or any new resource that's developed is going to be vulnerable to elite capture, especially if the political economy is skewed that way. And we had a discussion on that today, that's been happening. And no better, I think, illustration of that in the canal system, indigenous canal system that was mentioned earlier in Multan. And the British encountered the private canals of Punjab, where actually power came from not just being a landlord over barren land, but having the water source, being a water lord, having your own private canals. So the Noon Dewanas, in Shahpur, and the Kapwanis, for instance, in Multan, the Mundors in Firozpur, they had power because they had private canals. Now, interestingly, these were over time incorporated into the perennial canal system, except for one group of private canals, which is the ones belonging to the Noon Dewanas in Sargodha, Shahpur. And why was that? Because of military recruitment. So they continued right up to 1947, although there's a copious documentation in Board of Revenue about getting them into the system. So, engineering, physical aspects, political aspects, social, all over-determine each other. It's a very complex package when you bring in a new resource like canal water. So I think we've had a discussion on that. Now, on the Indian Upper Riparian thread, I think, we met it quite a few times, and I know you're concerned about this. Absolutely right, but what is the challenge? And I think this could be a kind of Meiji moment for us. The Meiji restoration of 1868 in Japan was because of the imminent threat of a Western takeover, and they just left Japan out of the picture and were going for China and India and much easier fruit to kind of pick because Japan was pretty barren. And during that time, the feudal elite, the samurai warriors, etc., made a concerted decision to modernize Japan. And that's when you begin to get the entire kind of transformation of Japan. So if this is an existential threat, which it should be to us, then why can't we galvanize, why can't we be productive and think of the future kind of linkages and systems that we need to develop and make this into that kind of aging moment, because of its importance. Now, the whole area of again linking past and present, I think my own sort of struggle with what one should be doing there is, in fact, has been a dozen or so articles on this whole issue, that how do you take pre-47 and post-47 and link them up? Because if there are strong contemporaries, if there are linkages, we tend not to identify those, because social scientists have mostly concentrated on post-1947. When you look at the pre-47, by and large, it's just a few throwaway lines on the national movement. In fact, last July at the European South Asian Studies Conference, I gave a paper called Rethinking the Origins of Pakistan, by trying to say that, for heaven's sake, look at what is happening in the Indus Basin itself and the economic and social changes there, and then analyze why Pakistan happens, because it makes much more sense, even for the situation that develops after 47. So even going into the pre-colonial period, especially for the Punjab, because it did experience its major qualitative and fundamental changes before colonialism. Not after colonialism, like much of British India, which the British inherited successor states that were ruled by the governors of the provinces, our Bengal, Tipu Sultan, etc., Hyderabad, because there hadn't been that change. But in the Punjab, the change took place before the British came. And that's why you have a peasantry that the British acknowledged, in fact, in the organization in a big way, which had sought its autonomy through revolutionary activity going over decades. But they had virtually just finished off the old Mughal elite. And that is why you have a Punjab diaspora spreading from Vancouver right through going east to Queensland, where they're growing bananas and sugarcane. So please try to identify those linkages, because otherwise it's very difficult to understand our political economy post-47. The other big, I think, is not a revolution at all, it's a disaster in terms of the irrigation department. department, I think this has to be noted that around 1990, if you know anything about this, the irrigation department in Punjab becomes a deficit department. From being an organization where your capital cost of the Lower Chenab Canal is coming in every 30 months, and the Lower Chenab Canal is less productive, or Barimar, but they're all productive. They are all spinning off huge Aviana returns that have overtaken the land revenue returns. And from the 1990s, and this is why it's not just a physical issue, it's an organizational issue. It's the way our bureaucracies, our elite mindsets, our linkages with each other are regulated, are structured, that we begin to downturn and we begin to underdevelop. And if you look at the irrigation department, as a result of that, who's going to pay for the rehabilitation, which needs to be done, Donsa, Chamsa, Chashma, whatever, etc. So you go for World Bank loans, and they come back and say, okay, now change the system because we want our loan back. So the whole area of participatory irrigation management, and maybe we can talk about this in the afternoon, came from World Bank pressure to decentralize the irrigation system and move the irrigation department from operations to regulation, to monitoring, to a 21st century mode. And what we've seen essentially, somebody mentioned the farmers' organization, but there's been a whole counter-revolution against that reform. BIDA and SIDA are now virtually kind of, rolled back. So it's this whole momentum of counter-revolutions that we have to look at, and I've been trying to struggle with that, some of my recent work. So the future is really not so much on what. We keep talking about what needs to be done. It's a wish list. We want to concentrate on how it's going to be done. How are those targets? Every 10-year-old knows what needs to be done. But how is it going to be actually achieved? And who is going to do it? Who's going to be the agency? Who are going to be the vanguard types of formations, organizational, business perhaps, public policy, that are going to achieve the targets that we need more and more immediately in the 21st century? And where we have a relapse of institutional reform over and over again, how many times is opportunity going to come? How many times is the postman going to knock? So I think we need to wake up not only in the very important area of Indian riparian aggressiveness, but across the board in how we understand how this society is being managed. Very complex society, a hydraulic society, the largest hydraulic society in the world. And again, look at the whole area of Karabakh. When you mentioned Karabakh, immediately you started talking about Sindh and Punjab being, kind of suspicious about each other. Not about Karabakh itself. So why don't we do another important thing, which is at the same time, because of the increasing dysfunctionality, begin to devolve the provinces. If India can move from 15, 16 states in 1947 to 32, 33 now, what's the big deal in having these 4 big wrestlers turning up and, kind of distorting and neutralizing every initiative, whether it's IRSA or NFC or, Karabakh. So please make a little province out there in Miyawali or wherever, and let them have the tap. And the Punjab, 100 million people plus. The largest country in the Europe is Germany at 80 million. So why can't we have 13, 14 provinces? So that the people get justice, that they link up better with the local government systems, etc. Because everything is going, we haven't even had a census, proper census probably for the last 50 years. So we have public policy planning out. So a number of critical issues, and I think it's incredible that, we have this WIT at LUMS. So this is the critical thing. Without water, without proper irrigation management, etc. And I'm not only gratified, I'm overwhelmed that there's so much, notice being taken off my work. I thought it's, kind of lost and forgotten. So thank you very much indeed, and I've learned a lot today. It's incredible. Thanks so much for the time.
Thank you. Let's thank the panelists. I think this was a discussion that actually, when I first thought of the topic and sort of invited the panelists, I thought that maybe the audience would engage more in that period because I was so fascinated by the period. There are aspects of the period that we have not touched. So for example, the interaction of irrigation and religion and spirituality and the martial races, the formation of the army. It seems that the audience is not too interested in that. But I think as Imran Ali Saab has pointed out, the period just before the partition, I think if there is a PhD student out there who is looking for a topic, I think that probably this is what should be concentrated on. Also, from a very superficial reading of, because I'm not a historian or a social scientist, it seems that work on other provinces. In Professor Gilmartin's book, I think there is a chapter describing the village frontier. That was the first read for me. And I think maybe a parallel work should be done for other parts of the country as well. So once again, I think these lessons from history, I think these are very, very important I keep repeating this language, projecting into the future, but then nobody really knows. So once again, let's thank all the panelists. We are running quite behind the time. So what we'll do is that we'll have a very, very quick break of 5 minutes so that we can reconfigure and set up the next speaker. And then we have two very excellent talks coming up, building more on the themes that we have just touched on in this whole morning. Thank you very much.